What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the opinionated hippie. And finally, it's been a while, I know, back with some Zappa. I was waiting for the next ZFT, or it's not ZFT anymore, it's UMG. I was waiting for the next UMG release to be announced. They're dragging their feet on that, so it's not coming yet. But I thought I would start this. I knew I was eventually going to do it. Might as well start it now. This will never get completed, but I'm going to try to review every single available live Zappa show that's floating around out there or that I have in my closet on cassette. Some of them have been converted to CD. Some of them I have on a drive. But yeah, and we're going to randomly just pick a leg of a tour to start with. And because I'm trying to motivate myself, we're going to start with the final leg of the 1974 Summer Fall Tour, the U.S. East Coast Tour, Fall 74. Starts on October 28th, finishes on December 3rd. We'll throw that New Year's show in there as part of this just because. And yeah, we're going to do two shows today. We're going to talk about October 28th, the opening show of this leg of the tour, and the following night, October 29th. Not every show has a tape out there available. Some shows, as the first one, the 28th, we only have a snippet, a portion, but I'm going to address everything that's out there. We'll do Fall 74 first, and I'm open for suggestions. So yeah, if you have a tour you really, really would like me to cover, drop it in the comments. And as we plow through 74 over the next couple months, I will tally those comments, and whichever tour gets the most votes, we will do that next. But anyways, I'm going to talk about them, then I'm going to rank them. So we're going to start off with the first show of the Fall 74, of the third, I think this is the third leg of the Fall 74 tour, right? We did, no, maybe the third leg is we did the States, we went to Europe, we're back in the States for the East Coast tour. First show is at the Palace Theater, Waterbury, Connecticut. We only have Don't Eat the Yellow Snow available. Really, really poor sound quality. I would give it like a C minus. No, not a C minus. Maybe a C plus. There are parts that you can hear what's going on. Frank is very talkative. We only get a Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. That's it. Just a Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. It's got great energy. Frank seems to be having a good time. There's some talking. There's some laughing. Some really bad cuts in here. Some warbly tape distortion throughout it. It's a rough 12 minutes of listen, but the energy is good. And as someone who absolutely adores this tour, I found moments of joy in it, though I have no reason to ever go back and listen to it again. So that's all we have for the debut show from this tour, is that little snippet. The following show that we have available is from the next night, October 29th, 1974. This is at the State Farm Show Arena in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which we find out during the Penguin in Bondage that drops. We pretty much have the complete show here. We find out during the Penguin in Bondage that the line about the flaming hoop, jumping through the flaming hoop, there was something that occurred backstage at this theater in 1970, which inspired the lyrics for Penguin in Bondage. So Frank acknowledges that to the audience before they play Penguin in Bondage. We have a pretty decent sounding show here. I would give it a B, maybe a B plus. There are issues with the sound, and a huge issue with the sound, namely that Frank's guitar is really, really, really buried in the mix quite a bit. As the show goes on, as he solos, he gets louder and louder in the mix, and you can actually hear more of what he's actually doing. But early on in the show, it really just seems like you're listening to a free-for-all with George Duke and Chester Thompson going at it. Every once in a while, we'll get some like Ruth in there. Tom Fowler's in and out of the mix, but Frank gets buried in the mix. That being said, I really still enjoyed this. Like the first major solo that we have is, there's a Stinkfoot solo, but it gets cut pretty badly. There's an Inca Road solo. It starts off beautifully. They're kind of Duke and FC are kind of going back, kind of trading ideas. And then Frank kind of goes off, and you don't really get a sense of everything he's doing, but what Duke's doing in response and what Chester's doing in response is fantastic. So even though he is buried, this band is such an incredibly talented band, as are all Frank bands, that, I don't know, I found enjoyment in it. But we get a pretty typical show for this tour for this era. Opens up with a really fun tush, tush, tush. Starts off with a tres, cuatro, bum, bum, bum. Just right into it. Sounds good. Nappy's sax sounds absolutely fantastic. Sound-wise, there's some hiss there, but I think a lot of the instruments are coming through pretty well, other than Frank's guitar. A lot of tuning in this tush, tush, tush before we go into the Stinkfoot. Stinkfoot, tape-wise, is probably the roughest moment on here. We get a cut in the vocals before we even get to the solo. Right after that burst of solo early on, there's a cut in the vocals. The guitar solo is way in the mix, then we get a cut in the guitar solo. So the Stinkfoot, kind of all not there. Then we get an Inca Roads. Other than the fact that Frank is buried in the mix on his guitar solo, and it really doesn't even feel like a guitar solo as much as it just feels like a free-form jam because we're not aware what Frank is doing. Even though that's the issue, it still sounds really good. The band sounds good. When we get to the end theme at the middle, well, you know, Frank does a solo and then he goes then da na 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 na. Ruth is really loud. Whatever she's playing on percussion, like completely takes over the sound for like 5 or 10 seconds, really loud. And then George Duke solo sounds great. Duke and Nappy, anytime they solo, their instruments are coming through clear, crystal. It sounds good. The band sounds amazing. Frank, there's that famous "If We Were All Living in California," I think it's the extended version on Meat Light where Frank's telling the band, hey, just go out and tour without me. Like, you don't need me. And then Jimmy Carl Black's like, no, man, they might come once, but they're not coming back once you realize you're not here, that you're not in the band. I'm listening to this 74 band. I'm like, I'm sure this band could just do it without Frank. I'm like, it sounds absolutely amazing. And this band was maybe talented enough to carry it through. Well, that's maybe a stretch, but not hearing Frank in this Inca Roads definitely hurts it, but, and it's also not the longest solo ever. Then we get the Penguin to Mercy, Dog Meat, Building a Girl sequence. The Penguin solo is Frank takes his time before he starts playing. Once we get into the solo thing, he starts off really low, kind of dirty, kind of sporadic, kind of dark. And then when he kind of digs in, I think he hits a wah. I think we got some like really aggressive kind of wah sound. Hard to tell because he's pretty buried in the mix. We get one of those just really weird 74 type jams with Chester's doing all this weird stuff on drums and it feels like it's going to fall apart. It's not really this cohesive driven jam. And this tour is, I think, absolutely fantastic. Frank's guitar playing, because his interactions with Chester are just amazing. And this is the beginning of that just kind of falling apart type thing. And I don't know, it really works. So the Penguin in Bondage to Mercy sounds great. Dog Breath sounds great. There's a cut in Uncle Meat, so we're missing a little bit of that. We get a really nice Building the Girl. Florentine Pogan is introduced as a love song. So we get a love song here. The drop into the solo is great. We finish the song and there's a little moment when they're kind of vamping before Frank goes into his solo. We drop into that solo. Frank, again, is buried in the mix. This is a pretty short Florentine Pogan solo. You go back to something like that one from the KCET show that's on Token of His Extreme, which is like epic, epic, epic. One of the best solos ever. This is a pale shadow of that. Nice to hear Florentine Pogan. The song sounds good. The solo, even if it had been great, we probably wouldn't have been able to hear it. So next we get a Montana. Really nice Montana. Almost immediately, Zappa is calling out Ruth on, like, I might be moving to Montana soon. Once Ruth catches up with us or makes something that she is once again behind on the tempo in Montana, which would be a theme in this, well, happened earlier in Helsinki. We might have to play this like a ballad if Ruth can't catch up. Another really slow start to the solo, and this is not your like upbeat, aggressive, super funky Montana solo as we would get in 73 and early 74. This is a Chester-driven solo where it feels like, again, we're going to fall apart. Frank's doing a lot of back and forth with the band. Chester does something, Frank does something, George does something, Frank does something. Isn't really coalescing around an idea to solo on as much as he's just enjoying this like playing space. It's about a minute and a half, maybe a little more, that he finally starts to get aggressive and like he starts to actually focus on his solo. So the final run towards the before we go back into the song is a pretty aggressive solo. But for the most part, it is Frank just kind of having fun with the band, and before he starts to like deliver a solo proper. Then we go into George. We get the Booger Man. And this is like, as I'm sitting listening to this tape, and I'm like, okay, it sucks that I can't hear Frank's guitar playing. It sucks that a couple of these solos, Florentine Pogan, Inca Roads, they aren't that long. He is kind of early in the tour, even though, you know, they had 3 weeks off. Maybe he's still warming up. We get to Booger Man, and I'm all in. I will sit through every one of these tapes to hear George do his thing. He's hitting his finger. He's going to hit his finger because he's playing that finger cymbal. Eventually, he's going to hurt himself as he's trying to, Frank says, eroticize you. Then when Frank turns it over to George just starts like scat singing, and he's like, I don't need no piano. And he just starts singing a bunch. And then he goes into this whole thing about, I think Nappy says something about how like he's spiritual, or he's going to uplift us, or he does yoga, or he makes some reference to George being enlightened. And then George starts calling everybody the tree, and like Chester is the trunk of the tree, Nappy is the ornaments hanging on the tree, Ruth is the everything spiritual about the tree, and then he goes, Tom Fowler. And we never find out what Tom Fowler is, so I don't know what Tom Fowler is. At the end of it, right before they go into Dupree's Paradise, Frank finally comes forward. He goes, I am the dog pissing on the base of the tree. So that tracks. We get an awesome George solo. We get some spacey synth stuff. We go into some crazy like jazz. At one point, George is like, let's play some bebop. Let's play some abstract bebop. One of the set lists I saw for this, it has Thelonious Monk's Straight No Chaser as being quoted in here. And I'm thinking maybe it's a reference to this like weird jazzy bebop section. And I guess there's a little bit of little straight note, maybe a quote in there, but it just sounds like maybe it's generic jazz that George is just riffing on, though maybe he is riffing on Thelonious, but I think that's a little bit of a stretch. It might be, who knows? Or maybe I'm just missing it completely and I didn't hear it. But then we go on to a Get On Down jam. The band comes in, we get the bass funk, we get some Get On Down, Get On Down. We get some Christmas lyrics improvised by Nappy. We got a very big Christmas theme here. The tree apparently is a Christmas tree. And then at the very end, after Frank announces that he's the dog, he tells Ruth to play chimes solo. And Ruth starts playing these really big, heavy chimes, and we get a little Ruth chimes jam before we go into Dupree's proper. Slight cut in the segue, which always sucks. And then the Dupree's is gorgeous. Napoleon opens up with this gorgeous sax solo that's pretty much just him and George for a good long bit. George is doing these really soft, jazzy chords. Nappy eventually goes into like his weird sound effects. Frank comes in on rhythm. Things get a little more chaotic. But Napoleon gets a really nice, long, healthy stretch to solo in here. Fowler eventually gets a really good bass solo. George Duke comes back and starts doing some like back and forth with the percussionist and George. So he gets kind of a solo, but it's a really playful, interactive one. Finally, we get a straight up drum percussion solo. Then Frank finishes it off with his solo. Starts off really low key, a lot of trilling, action, super chill vibe. And then after he does that for a while, he starts playing like some chords. And it sounds like in this part as he's going away from the trilling notes and he's kind of going in a more like solo direction. He's going to like come up with an idea and maybe solo proper. He plays what sounds like the beginning of Blessed Relief, plays that chord a couple times. Then he goes into what sounds like a little Zoot Allures chord action. And then that kind of builds to this great, like almost Grateful Dead, Crazy Fingers-esque spiraling energy that's pretty awesome, or kind of what they would do at the end of He's Gone when they would do that little spiral jam before they went off. And we kind of get that. And then Frank eventually, when that gets going, digs in and we get a really cool sort of groove vamp for like the proper solo that closes us out. For the most part, it seems like this is really just him playing around and figuring things out. I would say the good 2/3 of this is just not really him soloing properly, but just kind of messing around with the guitar before he like delivers a quote unquote proper solo. But then it gets cut short and Frank blames somebody backstage for cutting off the sound on stage. Though apparently the only sound that gets cut off is Frank's guitar because we can still hear the drums and we can still hear the keyboards. Then we get a tush tush tush. We get a really nice high energy Camarillo Brillo as an encore. And then they close out with Trouble Every Day, which Frank says we have just enough time to do part of this song. They do a More Trouble Every Day. It's a pretty short solo, but it is the most focused, direct, intense, maybe minute and a half solo of just Frank intensity. Nothing epic. Ends the show on a good note. But yeah, I enjoyed that show. That's how much I love this tour. So you're going to get a pretty biased review of all of these 74 shows because this band is just perfect. Frank is in a good mood. I laughed a couple times. All of George, Napoleon, and Frank are having a good time telling jokes and going at each other about the Christmas thing. George sounds great. Fowler, when you can hear him, sounds great on bass. Napoleon's sax solo. Just the one major crime in this is Frank's guitar is pretty buried in the mix. So those are the first two shows that we have available on tape of the final leg of Fall 74. That's what they look like in ranking. Of course, I have 1029 higher than 1028 because we only have the Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. But yeah, that's what we got so far. I'm excited to be getting in here. We're going to jump into some more shows, make our way through December 3rd. Once we get this whole tour, this whole leg of the tour is fantastic. So, but yeah, if you want to know other tours, let me know in the comments. If you have more thoughts on this tour, things I missed, all that stuff, let me know. Subscribe, like, share, comment. And I believe both of these are on YouTube. I think they're on Zappa tiers if you want to subscribe to there and listen there. But yeah, good listen. All right, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Peace. Talk to you later.